interceding for us from heaven. Order your AFR Easter buttons at $15 per 10-pack at resources.afa.net or by calling 877-927-4917. Remember, Resurrection Sunday is April 20th. Order your AFR Easter buttons today at 877-927-4917.
Jenna Ellis in the morning on American Family Radio.
I love talking about the things of God because of truth and the biblical worldview.
The U.S. Constitution obligates our government to preserve and protect the rights that our founders recognize come from God, our Creator, not our government. I believe that Scripture in the Bible is very clear that God is the one that raised up each of you, and God has allowed us to be brought here to this specific moment in time.
This is Jenna Ellis in the morning.
Good morning. Good morning. It is Thursday, March 27th, and the war with the judicial branch and activism goes on. And I think there's also, instead of judicial restraint, we have seen a lot of judicial reluctance in the form of Justice Amy Coney Barrett and Justice Roberts as well. Because when we're dealing with these activist judges, like the district court level judge, who thinks that he can tell Trump to turn a plane around in the middle of the ocean over international waters and do all of this stuff that clearly he has no jurisdiction over and is not part of his Article 3 responsibilities. Where are the higher courts? And so when Trump and others are calling for impeaching and removing these judges that are clearly pushing out political opinions, not rule of law opinions, then Roberts says, the process. It's a process, man. It'll come through the appeals court. Let's wait and see. Let's not just have our day in court, our decade in court. And it's the appeals process. A reasonable person who actually understands and takes their job seriously of what it means to manage a branch and actually understands the rule of law, might suggest to the Trump lawyers, put this up on a petition, and we'll take it up and immediately reverse. But no, we have to just wait, and this is judicial reluctance because, as Amy Coney Barrett said in her confirmation hearings, we don't enterprise our own cases. We have to wait until they come to us. And there's some good restraint in that, but a lot of it is merely sitting in their ivory tower and academically pontificating instead of understanding the real world consequences. But my good friend Steve Deace wrote an excellent column in Blaze Media that you really need to read. It's titled "Trump's War Against the Deep State Starts with the Courts. The Left Intends to Use Rogue Judges to Undermine Trump's Second Term, just as it relied on the Russia investigation and Fauci to derail his first." And Steve also posits, we are not a nation of laws. We never have been. We are a nation of political will, and we always will be. So good morning, Steve, and I agree with you.
Morning, Jenna. And I think that we have kind of come now, you and I had this conversation here on your show back in January when everybody was, ourselves included, very excited about the level of preparation the Trump administration 2.0 had and launched with. The multi-coastal D-Day-like deluge they launched at the left on multiple fronts, platforms, and issues. But remember, I said back then we would eventually come to the place where the traditional mechanisms of how we cook the sausage around here would have to be confronted. And I originally meant that to your audience in the context of a do-nothing Congress, that it's basically impossible to get anything that matters out of these people. And now they don't really have a majority in the House they can even fake is functional. It's so small. But even sooner than I expected, it's happened with the courts. And it's very clear, if you want to stop a populist uprising, then you deploy countermeasures that are outside of the direct accountability of a popular vote. And this pattern has now hit the trifecta. The Russia collusion hoax came out of the intelligence community. So, permanent unelected national security, intelligence community bureaucrats with perpetual security clearances that the Trump administration is just now beginning to revoke. And therefore, they have a perpetual platform, but they're outside of any immediate accountability from the voters that are uprising against the system. After that was finally put down with the closing of the independent counsel office by Bill Barr, and I think that was in March of 2019, almost exactly a year later, we get another one now. And this is from the unelected bureaucrats in the public health sector. We have to shut everything down. And you notice the trend here. Again, unelected officials from agencies that have a lot of built-in generational capital. Well, we're patriots. We're, especially on the right, we come out of the Reagan 80s. You go get maybe the most decorated law enforcement officer in American history and put him in charge of the independent counsel's office. So it has this appearance of being above reproach, and then you do the same thing with public health. Well, we trust these people on everything. They tell us to give our kids 70 shots. We don't ever ask any questions. Otherwise, you're a kook, right? The pattern now goes to the most powerful psyop of them all, and that's the judges, because for decades, the Republicans have any Republican has cowered in fear at the words the courts have spoken, and the people are conditioned now to believe that the courts were meant to have an undue measure in interpreting the Constitution to the point of having the final say. Not a say, three co-equal branches of government in terms of ability to interpret the Constitution, but the only say, really. I mean, we've gone from even in the last 10 years, it's gone from even sola judicial to solo judicial. They get the only say. We now they don't get the final say, the only one. We don't know what anything goes until the courts tell us. Again, another non-directly elected body, because, again, they're outside the purview and accountability of the people. And this is on purpose. And so what you're watching here is nothing less than a judicial coup. And it's a framework that, frankly, we can't live in. We cannot play judicial roulette anymore, where even when we do well, we win about 30% of the time and lose about 70%. If you look at everything until Obamacare, they did that legislatively, but not since the Great Society and the welfare state. For the 50 years between the Great Society, the welfare state, and Obamacare, everything terrible the left did to this country, they did via judicial fiat, and that's not a coincidence. And so we're at this juxtaposition now where there's no way out. I listen, I love the idea of impeaching justices. Your audience needs to understand. We've done it 15 times ever. The last one was in 2010 over a bribery charge. It's a full impeachment case. You're going to need 2/3 votes in the Senate, folks. We can't get Republicans to agree on the framework of a frickin' tax cut. You're going to get a 2/3 vote. Get out of here. Meanwhile, the weeks and months that's even if you could get united on it, you won't. But even if you could, the weeks and months of political capital and focus on this, you're going to have their judges everywhere else, Jenna, just running absolutely roughshod. How roughshod? Here's the data. Trump faced more federal injunctions in February alone than Biden did his entire 4 years. Now, this is the president who took the extraordinary step of being even rebuked by Amy Coney Barrett and John Roberts for saying you can't get a job at a company with more than 100 employees unless you take an experimental toxic genetic serum. My own CDC director just went on TV and admitted doesn't work. This is the president that just opened the borders up. This is the presidency that lied about the mental faculties and conditions of the president himself. This is the presidency that openly tried to imprison its primary political target and also used the Department of Justice to go after his supporters for doing things like praying. Okay, so that administration in 4 years did not face as many injunctions as Trump has in February alone. And then I'll close with this piece of data here. Trump's been president for 18% of the 21st century. He has already received nearly 70% of all federal injunctions against the presidency. 92% of those injunctions were issued by Democrat-appointed justices. The plan here is very clear. Just as the intelligence community was used to hold back the Trump presidency and stillborn it in the first term while the Democratic Party got its act together, and then the public health bureaucracy was used to make sure there wouldn't be a second Trump presidency, you are now seeing the judiciary is being used to hold back momentum, to thwart Trump in ways a Democratic Party who thinks Jasmine Crockett is its future spokeswoman has no chance. But give it some time. Let it figure out its sea legs. Wait till Trump makes a major mistake so we can pounce on that. That's what's going on here. And there's just no way around it. Trump is going to have to be the Abraham Lincoln here. And just as Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation as a deterrent against the dreadful Dred Scott decision, probably the worst decision in Supreme Court history until Roe v. Wade, Trump is going to have to just defy the court. And he's probably going to do it more than once. And here's what they need to not do. I would actually not issue an Emancipation Proclamation. I wouldn't have a press conference. I wouldn't post on True Social, I'm doing this tomorrow at 3 a.m. I'd just do it. And I'd do it repeatedly. And I'd let them respond. And then ultimately, hey, if they want to run in the next election cycle on Trump does not enforce every single judicial fiat order, and Trump wants to run on, you guys hired me to interpret the Constitution as well. In fact, I have the job of executing those laws. All right. So if you want the court's interpretation of what the Constitution means, you can vote for Democrats. If you like my interpretation, vote for my congressman that I endorsed in 2026. Vote for my presidential candidate that I endorsed in 2028. That's how this was actually supposed to work. Ultimately, the people are sovereign. The people decide. Government by the consent of the governed. We have an independent judiciary, Jenna, but it's not independent of the will of the people.
I agree with you, Stephen. A lot to unpack there. A couple of observations. I think you're right on as much as the impeachment authority and power was given in Article 1 to the legislature for this purpose, to impeach rogue actors of the other two political branches. It shouldn't be political in the judiciary, but it is. So we're including them in political branches for the purposes of this conversation. This relies on Republicans to actually have the political will to get things done and to move it forward. And so when the founders give us the answers to these solutions, but we have for too long been so hesitant and reticent to use them, and we are always put back on our heels by all of the media attacks and the leftist strategy plan, then we fail to utilize the system as it was intended for checks and balances. I mean, this is the same thing as the balanced budget amendment that Governor DeSantis was out in Idaho and a couple of other states this week talking about and saying, we need to get to the 34 states so that we can basically bypass Congress because they're not going to do this. And he was talking about the Article 5 process. And there were Republicans in the comments to that video suggesting, we don't want a constitutional convention or a con. We're too scared to do this. And I'm thinking that's exactly the problem, because you've bought into the talking points. You're not using the system as it was intended. I mean, and if we don't, I get that, you're scared that somebody's going to hijack it. Well, the system has been hijacked anyway. So why wouldn't we use the solutions that the founders provided? And why wouldn't Trump, as you're suggesting, Steve, and I think this is the best response, is to simply ignore the clearly unconstitutional and politically motivated opinions and continue to execute the authority in office. Let the Congress, call their meetings, do whatever, and do nothing, but can just continue to execute the power of office and wait and see what they do. But conservatives love, as you rightly observe in your piece, the right has typically responded with, we have to have fidelity just to the original intent. Now, I've been an advocate of that to an extent, but when you have a completely rogue party, which includes these political judges who they're not having any sort of fidelity to any sort of principle, then it's not for us to say, but they're in that office, so we have to go with their illegitimate authority. It's like a woman and the husband saying, in her marriage saying, but the Bible says to submit, so even though my husband is being clearly abusive, I need to submit. You're missing the principle, and the overriding principle is that is an exercise of illegitimate authority that we are required not to submit to. So how do we get this through conservatives' heads?
Well, first, let's define original intent. Too many conservatives think original intent is a process. No, it's not. It's not a process. The original intent of this country, was so that government by the people, for the people, would not perish from the earth. That's the original intent of this country. There was already a legal document giving English colonial settlers to the New World liberty by law. It was called the Magna Carta. They already had this, and it was over 100 years before the Declaration of Independence. So why do we need another one? Well, because the social compact was broken, and the new king of England, a pharaoh who knows not Joseph, decided that we're not going to live by that stuff anymore. We're not going to recognize your rights as Englishmen anymore. All right, and so that's when they declared their independence. a document of sedition, of secession. If you're an Englishman, we call it a document of independence. But it was a divorce. That's what it was. And it was saying, hey, you guys won't recognize our process. So the original intent was for us to be free Englishmen. We were to come here to this new world and bring our rights, liberty by law, given to us by law. We were to bring our rights with us as people of English descent. You're denying those. So we declare that there's a higher law than the king, all right, and that ultimately rights really don't come from governments. They come from God. And the government's job is to secure those God-given rights. I mean, that's the original intent of America. So if you are standing in the way of that, I don't care what process you claim. See, Marxists love process. See, what we do is we claim we're about deeply philosophical ideas of liberty, but worship process. Marxists do the opposite, okay? They actually claim that they worship the process. We have to follow Sanballat and Tobiah always show up when Nehemiah starts to rebuild the wall. And we've got to be, the devil's in the details. And we've got to make sure we've got this thing nailed down. Meanwhile, while you're arguing things that they're never going to uphold on their end, they're out back behind you, absolutely going to the original intent of their ideology. Okay? And so we have to understand who the enemy is, how they behave, and what reality is, you know? And so your argument, your example of submission is exactly right. You have to put these things in context. Ultimately, a wife is not submitting to her husband. Ultimately, a wife is submitting to Christ because she sees her husband submitting to him first. That's what headship means. He submits to Christ first. She submits to Christ through him. If her husband says, hey, I think Breaking Bad should really be an inspirational life story, let's follow suit, she cannot therefore disobey God to obey her husband. That would put her husband in the place of God. Okay? That's exactly what we have done. We have violated our own original intent by saying we will follow this process that leads to ungodly, un-American outcomes for reasons none of them are good. Cowardice, laziness. Frankly, if you want to know, there's every bit of the likelihood that that's why we did something stupid on the right, as it was some body of activism on the right gets paid, severely by maintaining a lie. And it's just case by case which one it is, and sometimes it's both. All right, so you've got fake conservative judicial societies that love this canard because it lets them put people like Amy Coney Barrett and John Roberts on the Supreme Court and hold their banquets and their functions and their outings and get young attorneys just out of law school like yourself to pay the dues to join so that you can get into the circuit, and you might one day get on the Federal Circuit Court of Appeals and be one of the 30% of justices who's worth a damn. Okay, and feel like you're part of the special people. Much of the time, the right is as paralyzed by cowardice as its own grift. There's usually some funding mechanism by which we can't actually defend our freedoms and be what we claim to be because someone's meal ticket might get disturbed. Okay, well, we're past all of that now. They're going to wreck this presidency. Just like Trump's first presidency, they weren't going to stop the independent counsel office until Trump hired an AG that would stop it. And just like at the end of that presidency, they weren't going to stop the scandemic unless Trump fired Fauci or Birx and made an example out of somebody and reversed course. Well, he didn't do it that time, and look what happened. The same thing is true here. All right, these judges won't stop themselves. All right, there are plenty of things Congress can do. I mean, the judiciary can't even fund itself. It can't appoint itself. It's completely beholden to the other branches. But the idea that you're going to get Mike Johnson's Congress to do anything, good luck with that. So we're right back. He's the only hero we have. All right. So Trump is going to have to listen to Thomas Jefferson, who worried about judges turning the Constitution into a, quote, mere thing of wax with this idea of judicial supremacy. He's going to have to follow the example of Lincoln. And that's what's not going to just save his presidency, going to save the country. And if he does those things, then he's going to take his place next to those kinds of names in history. If he doesn't, his presidency will fail because the judges are more of a hydra than even Fauci and the healthcare bureaucracy was. And they will still born it all the way. And then where we go from here as a country, I don't even want to think about that.
You're right. Absolutely right, Steve Deace, to go back to the founding and how so many people characterize that as a rebellion. And it's not, because as you're describing, we have to define original intent. We have to define legitimate authority. And when we're talking about a well-ordered society, when we're talking about a Judeo-Christian founding, when we're talking about our rule of law, this is why we have to dispel the myth that we are just predicated on a social contract that we can modify at any time, and that we, the people, can self-determine what moral is and the measurable difference between right and wrong, good and evil. Because if we have that kind of subjective definition, then our Constitution is merely a parchment guarantee. And if we want to say subjectively that the judiciary is suddenly, when the left agrees with them, the only branch that you cannot rebel against, or when the Dobbs opinion comes out, well, that's wrong and we're going to override it on the state level. And, for all of it doesn't matter what anybody says about illegal immigration. We're going to have these sanctuary states anyways. What the left is successfully doing is their own actual rebellion against a well-ordered society and authority.
Yes.
And so we have to understand what actual authority means. And when John Adams said our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people, totally inadequate to the government of any other, what he actually meant by that is that we have to understand what our Constitution is under, and that is under the law of nature and of nature's God. Because if we don't have objective moral truth, if we don't understand legitimate authority, then we will never understand the limited powers in the Constitution and what they're designed to preserve and protect. And so as we're having this conversation, and I think you're absolutely right that Trump just needs to continue to faithfully execute his powers that are given to him, what is your best prediction at this moment in time on Thursday, March 27th, that he and the current people around him, which I think are slightly better than the first administration, what is your best prediction that he will actually yield to the highest authority, which is God himself, do the right thing, regardless of all of the people yelling that he's not submitting to their illegitimate definition of the rule of law?
I think it's the highest we've ever seen in modern American history. We've never seen someone as close to the president as Stephen Miller is, saying the things that he is saying right now in every public forum that he has. So the bare minimum, not knowing, the intricacies of the inner workings of the Trump White House, myself not having worked there, at a bare minimum, but given my experience in politics, that tells me that at the bare minimum, Stephen Miller at least has enough of an audience with the president that he's being given license to go and make his own case for going down this road in public. And Trump is at least gauging it. And at a bare maximum, he's doing so at the direct order of Trump to till the soil for what's to come. So we're somewhere between those two parameters, and I think that's way more progress than we've ever had before. I think the most likely scenario is John Roberts is not an ideologue. He's an institutionalist. He views himself as the last man standing defending America's institutions. And so if you're the Colorado State Supreme Court that thinks you can nullify an election before it happens, he steps in. And if you think you're the Biden administration that can use institutions to mass poison people to the point that they'll lose all of their trust in vaccines in the public health sector, he'll step in. He's against whoever he views as disrupting institutions. And I think at the very least, as the threat of this looms, I think you could actually see Roberts step in for fear that Trump would do this and therefore destroy the entire canard of Roberts' existence. Okay? I do think at that point you could see something severe and unique from Roberts, from his court, to try and rein this in, to try to get the jump on Trump doing it himself, and therefore, and thereby for the next generation, diluting the courts of much of its power post-Roberts in the generation to come. So I think we're heading down one of those two avenues.
And we should be praying for the future of our country. And we'll have to take a break here. And Steve Deace, always appreciate your commentary, your insights, and your column. You need to read this. This is in Blaze Media. Trump's war against the deep state starts with the courts. This is, of course, by Steve, and this was published March 24th. But we need to be praying for the future of our nation and that we don't submit to illegitimate authority, that we understand that ultimately all authority is in the person of Jesus Christ, in in our Lord and Savior, and he is the one that gives government specific limited authority, just like he gives limited authority to the church, to parents in the family context, to the husband in the family context. And we need to understand the authority that he has given to government to operate legitimately and submit to that authority first, as the founders prescribed it and recognized. We'll be right back with more here on Jenna Ellis in the Morning.
Share-a-thon is coming up, and it occurred to me the other day, we've probably had Share-a-thon longer than I've been alive. Some of my first memories are of causing ruckus in Share-a-thon Central. And for many years, I have seen some of the same volunteers from all those years ago coming back and taking calls to help support the ministry.
Spring Share-a-thon is coming April 8th through 10th, and it's your chance to partner with American Family Radio.
Some years back, I realized Share-a-thon is not just a childhood memory for me, but it's an integral part of the ongoing ministry of AFR. Some people might not remember Share-a-thons as far back as I do, but most of our ministry partners have realized the importance of Share-a-thon for funding this ministry. And now, after all these years, I'm actually on the air as well as behind the scenes at AFR. And Share-a-thon is much more than just a place to play, but it's still a lot of fun.
Be listening April 8th through 10th for Spring Share-a-thon on American Family Radio.
Activate Summit 2025, June 12th through the 14th. Learn more and register at activate.afa.net/summit. Here's Wesley Wildman.
The whole thing's kind of been a dream of mine. Frank Turk will be there. Alex McFarland will be there. We use the word activism here at AFA, but really it's discipleship. It's living out of God's Word.
We'll even activate your kids. Here's Kendra White.
So the world is going to try to convince your kids that they can't trust the Bible. Well, Activate Kids covers the same kind of worldview training that the adults are doing, but in a kid-friendly, kid-appropriate way. And it's going to be super fun.
Activate Summit 2025 will take place June 12th through the 14th at Cadence Bank Conference Center in Tupelo, Mississippi. Get special ticket pricing now through April 18th.
We need to speak about God's absolute truth in a world where truth has become relative.
Register at activate.afa.net/summit.
Hello, Americans. I'm Todd Starr, and stand by for news and commentary next. Panhandle Junior High School in Texas started a Bible study for teenagers called Donuts and God. I can't think of a better combo. The kids get a sugar high by eating glazed donuts, and they get a spiritual high by reading God's Word. But the Freedom from Religion Foundation got wind of the event. Now they're threatening to sue. The Wisconsin-based group of atheists have a history of targeting smaller school districts. They're about as welcome as a cavity. They allege that government-sponsored Bible studies are against the law, that advancing a religious message is inappropriate and divisive. They say Panhandle Junior High may not host or promote the Donuts and God Bible study. Now, fortunately, this is a Texas school, so hopefully the Lone Star State will politely inform the atheists to pound sand. Only a godless heathen atheist would get triggered by a dozen glazed donuts and the Almighty. Hey, be sure to download my new podcast. It's available at toddstearns.com.
Welcome back to Jenna Ellis in the Morning on American Family Radio.
Welcome back. And as we're talking about this whole concept of securing our rights that come from God, our Creator, not our government. So these aren't constitutional rights, by the way. I like to say these are our unalienable rights that come from God that our Constitution is designed to preserve and protect. That is the best way to advocate for these things. We also have to turn to some questions that shouldn't be political, but of course they are in this age, and this includes issues that matter to Christian communicators, including freedom of speech, online censorship, technology access, all of these things that are somehow being debated because we've seen the rule of law, and I put that a little bit in air quotes, definitely a two-tiered system that on one hand allows all kinds of what the left would define as hate speech against Christians from the left, and they can say whatever they want to. But as soon as Christians want to talk about God in the public square. We want to actually advocate for our sincerely held religious beliefs. Then there's the censorship and, oh, this is so hateful. You can't possibly stand for traditional marriage and pro-life because that's hateful against this community and it's offensive to us. And so the national religious broadcasters and regular listeners will recall that the American Family Radio Network and myself and a few of our hosts were at the NRB convention in Dallas last month. The NRB, one of the great things that they do is advocate for these kinds of issues. And so there's a wide variety of litigation that's going on right now. And we want to just get an update on kind of where we're at in 2024 from Troy Miller, who joins us now. And he's the president of the NRB. And Troy, I really appreciate this in the context of this whole conversation as well, because let's start first with the principle that Christians and Christian communicators should not be second tier at all when it comes to things like freedom of speech, free exercise of religion, freedom of association, and freedom of the press.
Yeah, exactly right, Jenna. Thanks for having me today. But you're exactly right. There's a two-tiered system out there, and it's definitely biased against Christians and Christian communicators. If you go back to all the way to our founding fathers and you look at just the principles behind the First Amendment itself, and the fact that what was going on in the English system of law and the way the English system of governance worked, that the king, the monarchy, they wanted to decide, what the official religion was of the state. And, the founding fathers looked at that as part of their guidance when they came up with the First Amendment. They said, no, the free exercise thereof, period. Okay, period. And government was to stay out of it. If you get the crazy people who think Thomas Jefferson thought that there was a separation between religion and government, he thought there was a separation between government and religion, the other way around. And so these are the fundamental rights that were really given to us by our founding fathers. And Jen, I'll say one more thing. It was also clearly understood, and I think you quoted it earlier in the Adams quote, it was clearly understood that Christians need to be, and must be involved in the governance of this country, and all the way from the local level to the federal level.
Yes, and if Christians abdicate that responsibility, Troy Miller, then we are just leaving government to those who would subvert it and who not only don't understand the principles of morality and the laws of nature and of nature's God, but some who intentionally are bad faith actors that want to subvert it. And so when Christians engage, this is absolutely saying that we want to codify our morality, because somebody's morality is going to be codified into law. The whole idea of law saying what is permissive in a given society, what is prohibited, that turns on someone's view of morality. And so our founders recognized that in order for our Constitution to protect our individual rights, it has to be the morality of the Judeo-Christian worldview and the God of the Bible. And now were all of them the perfectly faithful, sincere Christians? Well, we could debate about that and their personal theological beliefs and all of that, but it doesn't really matter, because what they recognized in the Declaration, then in the preamble, and then into the Constitution, with the mandate, the philosophy, and then ultimately the limited powers that were given to government to fulfill that mandate, were based on truth and the person of God. And so when we're talking about Christian communicators, this, I think, is a platform that when we're talking about censorship is often underutilized, not here on AFR, obviously, but is underutilized in the sense that we tend to self-censor when people ask us, our beliefs and our political opinions and stuff. We're sometimes hesitant to stand up firmly and say, this is why I stand for traditional marriage. This is why I want to overturn Obergefell. This is why I believe in this policy, because my Christian worldview requires that, and that's the best explanation for the reality in which we're presented, as C.S. Lewis said, and we have to stand firmly on that. Where do you see in 2025, where do you see the best opportunities for Christian communicators to get across that point?
Well, I think in 2025, as we look at, the new medium, the new, medium platforms, especially the digital platforms, the social media platforms, TikTok and Instagram and some of these platforms that the younger generations are using. Those are the platforms today that I think that Christians need to get more involved in, both from an organizational, professional level, as well as an individual level. People need to, as you said, people need to not cower back from the fact that they hold their worldview, their biblical worldview should be right out in front and first and foremost, because that's the generation that's getting influenced the most. We've done a really great job, I think, on the current mediums, radio, television, even streaming is doing better, although we've got some fights there with the government and the streamers over access to those platforms. But really, one of the things that we pushed at this last convention was for the next generations, those generations that have those platforms, that they need to be active and they should be the loudest voices on those platforms.
Absolutely. And this is why, against all of maybe some people's better judgment, this is why I actively participate in things, especially like X, because that is the most prolific political platform. And if we're not calling out the false narratives and we're not speaking truth and we're not engaging, then we're leaving it to everybody else to shape the opinions of the readers and those who are engaged politically. And so let's talk about some of the Christians that are engaged politically, because this week, as you're well aware, Troy Miller, who is the president of NRB, the National Religious Broadcasters, my special guest this morning, former Arkansas Governor Mike Huckabee, President Trump's nominee for ambassador to Israel, appeared in front of the Senate Committee on Foreign Relations to examine his nomination. And so much of the objection from the left was based on his sincere, outspoken Christian worldview. That somehow, when you are nominated to a position in government or you run for office, you have to leave your Christian worldview at the door, and you have to become basically spiritual so that you can become political, and that somehow the separation of church and state, which is a myth, needs to be it needs to be fully adhered to, that you have to pick one or the other, engage in your church or engage in the state. And that is absolutely false. So when we're talking about broadcasting as Christians, there is absolutely an opportunity for some of that to be in public office as well.
Oh, look, not an opportunity. It should be a priority for people to do that. There's no law or rule, and again, we can go back to the Founding Fathers, that you somehow leave your faith in the pew when you get up and leave the church on Sunday. Your faith should be lived out every day. And look, I watched the hearing there, and I would say that it wasn't some of the opposition. It was the primary opposition to him being nominated for this position, that he was a conservative, Orthodox, evangelical Christian who's going to be ambassador to a Jewish state. I've known Mike Huckabee for probably 15 years or so, and we have a lot of connections to Israel. He has overwhelming support from the Jewish community to be in this role. I was at several Jewish events right after NRB, and they are just thrilled that Mike Huckabee, a man who's worked in Israel, understands the Jewish people, is going to be the person that's going to fulfill this ambassadorship. And so the left really looks at this. I don't think they care about Mike Huckabee personally, but they care about this. There's another person in government who holds that, as you said, the Judeo-Christian worldview at such high regard that it influences their decision making. And the left knows that the only thing that is preventing them from just rolling over this country and the world is this Judeo-Christian worldview. And so they will oppose you just for that fact, period, end of story.
And you mentioned, though, Troy, that Governor Huckabee, soon to be Ambassador Huckabee, hopefully has a lot of support, overwhelming support. What, in your view, is the best way that Christians and churches can support the politicians, the Christian communicators, but also those in public office, to continue to speak out firmly the truth and the Judeo-Christian worldview, and to act upon it, to legislate according to it, and to reclaim, in a sense, our country as being founded on the moral principles of God, and even if we weren't founded on the moral principles of God, that really is the only legitimate way for any society to govern, is recognizing our divine lawgiver. How can the church and Christian communicators best support Christians in government?
Yeah, thanks, Jenna, for asking that, because we often as Christians have this sort of mentality. We get all excited about the elections. We get involved. Thankfully, Christians turned out at the last election, not in as big in numbers as they really should, because if the Christian community turned out in the numbers that they have out there, every election would be won by people that were holding a Christian worldview. But don't look at your involvement with government and with governance as a one-time, event once every 4 years or every 2 years. You need to actively understand the positions that your senators are holding, your congressmen in your districts are holding, what bills they're doing. We have an AM radio bill going through. You need to call your congressman and tell them they need to pass the AM radio bill. And you need to call your senators, whatever state you're in. And it doesn't matter if you have blue senators or not. Call them and tell them you support Mike Huckabee's nomination for ambassador. They need to hear loudly, clearly, and much, much, much more often from the Christian constituents in their districts that let them know what they view and what they think that they should be doing as their representatives.
Yeah, absolutely. And I cannot say this enough, that Christians cannot just sit back and complain unless we are engaged. We should be rightly pointing out and discerning good versus bad, right versus wrong, all of that. But we need to be part of the solution, not just pointing out the problem. So we need to be vocal. We need to be active citizens engaged in our process. We have the blessing of liberty of participating in our government because it is of the people, for the people, and by the people. And we, as the people, need to engage. So Troy Miller, really appreciate it. And you can go to the National Religious Broadcasters at nrb.org to learn all about their advocacy in Christian broadcasting. And we'll be right back with more here on Jenna Ellis in the Morning.
Hi, I'm Tim Moore, Senior Evangelist on Christ in Prophecy. Can you see the signs of the times multiplying all around? Jesus is coming back, and He doesn't want His people to be unprepared. To stay up to date about unfolding events and get a biblical perspective on the signs of the times, listen to Christ in Prophecy here on American Family Radio. Join us Sundays at 11 a.m. Central as we reveal the prophetic hope for those who believe in Jesus Christ, as well as the Bible's warning about God's coming wrath to those who don't yet know Him.
This is Jan Markell with Understanding the Times Radio. Won't you join me this weekend as I help you understand the times, contend for the faith, and become a watchman on the wall? I hope you'll join me each week as we do that together, right here on Understanding the Times Radio.
Saturday afternoon at 1 Central and Sunday afternoon at noon Central on American Family Radio.
A wise man will hear and increase in learning, and a man of understanding will acquire wise counsel. My name is Abraham Hamilton III, and this is the Hamilton Minute. As Solomon pronounced the entire purpose for the book of Proverbs in its first chapter, he also noted that a wise man sets himself to hear, to learn, and to increase his knowledge as a result. That wise man, a man of understanding, also affirmatively seeks out wise counsel. In short, the wise man knows that he doesn't know it all. As a result, his course is set for continued accrual of wisdom. If you want to be wise, pursue sources of wisdom and learn from them. The greatest available wisdom source is God's holy word.
Listen each weekday from 5 to 6 p.m. Central for the Hamilton Corner, or visit the podcast page at afr.net for more from Abraham Hamilton III, Public Policy Analyst for the American Family Association.
You could be a part of our first ever weekend with AFA, Thursday, October 2nd through Saturday, October 4th in Tupelo, Mississippi.
Our Weekend with AFA event in October is going to be a chance to meet AFA supporters in person.
We'll have tours, fellowship, special speakers, and more.
I'll do some stand-up comedy, Abe will do some preaching, and I'm really excited about it.
It's a Weekend with AFA, Thursday, October 2nd through Saturday, October 4th in Tupelo, Mississippi. Speakers will include Abraham Hamilton III, Jenna Ellis, Tim Barton, Tim Wildman, and more.
I am thoroughly looking forward to our Weekend with AFA coming up in October, where we're going to be able to meet our supporters like yourself, to fellowship, to visit our facilities here in Tupelo, and to have everyone come together for a wonderful weekend.
That's October 2nd through 4th. It's a Weekend with AFA, and we hope you can join us. Register at afa.net/weekend. That's afa.net/weekend.
Welcome back to Jenna Ellis in the Morning on American Family Radio.
Welcome back. And as we're talking about returning to a system that is actually for the people, by the people, and in line with the principles of freedom and liberty, there's another great piece in Blaze Media from James Keenan that is titled "Time to Dismantle the Fed's Debt-Based Dollar Scam. The Federal Reserve's Unchecked Power to Print Money Fuels Inflation, Transferring Wealth from Ordinary Americans to the Elites who control the system." So James Keenan joins us now. He's an economist, author, and journalist. And James, all of these issues in the economy, I think, are part and parcel to the Trump mandate. And we can't promote a healthy, well-ordered society that is focused on actually exercising our individual liberties if we are so strapped as citizens to inflation, to exorbitant taxes, and to essentially becoming the funding source for an ever-increasing administrative state and bureaucracy that is absolutely out of control.
Oh, good morning, Jenna. Thanks for having me on your show, and thanks for everything you do for America. You're absolutely right, and I'm supportive of a lot of the things that Trump is doing, and I think he and subsequent administrations like his can make a big difference in America. I do think we need to recognize, though, that there's going to be a lot of turmoil in the short term, a lot of headwinds. Some of that's legacy stuff, like the high interest rates and low quantitative easing that we have right now because we're trying to recover from the inflation out of the COVID period. I think we're going to see some turmoil from the tariffs. I'm not a big fan of tariffs. I know Trump's committed to them, but it's going to drive some turmoil in the economy. We're going to see some turmoil from the DOJ layoffs. It's a natural thing when people get laid off. They have to reposition themselves in the economy, and there's going to be some turmoil. We continue to deficit spend, and our debt continues to grow, so that's going to create some turmoil. And unfortunately, I think our legislature is going to be less than cooperative as we go forward because they've always been less than cooperative. And the Democrats are getting warmed up with their guerrilla warfare tactics. We're going to see a lot more of this lawfare. A lot more of people taking to the streets and protesting. So in the short term, and the markets are already pricing this in, and when you look at the consumer confidence statistics, they're starting to drop, and we're starting to see some recession indicators. So that's going to happen. I mean, when you create that kind of disruption, you're going to see those things. In the longer term, though, I'm very, very bullish if Trump and subsequent administrations can do the right things. And I'm very hopeful that we can do those things, and I can expand on those if you'd like.
Yeah, and you make the argument in this article that our monetary system is a mechanism for transferring wealth to urban elites who produce nothing, and the first step in understanding money and our whole economic system overall is dispelling this notion that a valuable asset like gold backs it, because it doesn't. So maybe unpack that a little bit and where we can expect, hopefully, Trump to go with the economy, because he only has 4 years in office.
Right. Yeah, I don't think a lot of people realize that our entire monetary system is based on debt, that money is created only when banks loan out money or when the Federal Reserve creates money by buying treasury bills. So there's nothing backing it. There's no gold. And amazingly, if everybody paid off all their debts, there literally would be no money in America because it's entirely a debt-based structure. And what that means is bankers and the Federal Reserve and the banks that own the Federal Reserve have the monopoly on printing this money, of creating it out of thin air. And so they loan it out to people, and they charge interest on it, and they're making an extraordinary amount of wealth on money that literally they create by pushing a few keystrokes on a keyboard. And so all of that is extracting wealth from people who are borrowing that money, trying to live their lives, paying interest to these bankers. The bankers are literally doing nothing but printing this money and earning extraordinary amounts of interest, getting richer and richer, and buying up the assets of the country. It's a terrible thing for the common person in America, and it's a cabal of people who have taken over the country.
So this is very frustrating, obviously, to people who want a better economic system. And there are a lot of Republicans who have for a long time, and conservatives generally, who have called for reducing the federal debt and actually balanced budget. Is part of it. And then there are other Republicans and certainly Democrats who just kind of ignore that problem. They overspend. They just simply don't care. So it's not necessarily just a partisan issue. But when we're talking about something like balancing the budget, is that even possible in today's ecosystem?
The short answer is no, but the longer answer is yes. In the short term, we've got some terrible problems to unpack. I mean, our current deficit is $2 trillion. It was $2 trillion last year. It's going to be $2 trillion this year. Our debt's approaching $40 trillion, and we're going to exceed our debt cap shortly, and that's going to create a lot more turmoil in the country. We also, the federal government owes the Social Security Trust Fund $2.8 trillion. It's been borrowing from the trust fund. So that's going to be another minefield ahead. Another minefield is interest. We're approaching $1 trillion in annual interest payments because of our debt. And as we roll over more debt and our total debt becomes greater, our total interest spending every year is going to start to approach $2 trillion, which is bigger than anything else we spend money on. So in the short term, we've got a big problem. The really only way out of this is to grow the economy and to grow it fast. And those are the things that Trump needs to focus on, because if you can grow the economy, you reduce the impact of that debt, you reduce the deficit because you also drive revenue to the government as you grow the economy, and you put more and more people to work paying taxes. It's the only way out of this is to take all the brakes off the economy, hit the gas pedal, and grow as fast as we can grow.
And I'm speaking with James Kina, who wrote this great piece in The Blaze that you should read, Time to Dismantle the Fed's Debt-Based Dollar Scam. He is also an author and an economist. And so how would you define boosting the economy? I mean, that I think that it carries a lot of different connotations. What specifically do you think the Trump administration needs to prioritize?
Some of it they're already doing. Number one, we've got to become energy independent. Energy is the lifeblood of an economy and of a society. And if you can become energy independent, it can become cheap, plentiful. You can become competitive in world markets, and you can drive inflation down because it affects the cost of everything. The second thing you have to do is unleash business. We've got to reduce the regulations. We've got to reduce these mandates for silly things like DEI. We've got to streamline all the permitting processes. It's one thing to say, hey, bring your factories over here, everybody, but if you can't build them because it takes 2 years to get a permit, you're doomed. We've got to have rational environmental policies, not policies that are irrationally based on a secular god called climate change. And as we free up federal resources, whether it's buildings, human capital, or land, private enterprises need to take advantage of that and use those things for productive purposes. But the most important thing we have to do is leverage human capital. America's not doing that well right now. The first thing we can do, and the Trump administration is working on it, is to redeploy our unproductive government workers and get them involved in the private economy doing something productive. But we also have tremendous incentives not to work in our country. There's a lot of people who simply sit on the sidelines, like in the age group of 24 to 30-year-old males. 30% of those people are not even working full-time. 30% of young men are not working full-time. And when you look at how we spend our education money, we're creating a lot of graduates with useless degrees, with soft degrees that really don't add much value to the economy. Whereas we're starved for people who have skilled trades or vocational skills. And so you graduate with a soft degree and make $40,000, or you could become a plumber or an electrician and make $100,000. We've really done something stupid with how we've allocated our training money in the country.
Yeah, and that goes directly to the whole dismantling of the Department of Education, because the left, of course, just wants to indoctrinate on, the feminist degree in underwater basket weaving, that, pride, whatever, while not teaching skill sets that actually are productive, contribute to society, but don't necessarily need to go through the indoctrination camps that are publicly funded institutions. So, well said. James Kina, really appreciate your time. You can read his piece in Blaze Media, and as always, you can reach me and my team, Jenna, at AFR.net. Don't miss the next episode of On Demand dropping tomorrow. We're going to unpack even more about the economy.